Into the Depths. Written by Penstroke and read by Thornquill. A full cast production. Chapter 1: Beneath the Castle. Princess Celestia pressed her back against the cold brick, gasping for breath as the light from her horn flickered. Her lungs burned. Her mouth was filled with the fairest taste of blood. Her legs trembled, threatening to give out beneath her. The cut across her flank, across her cutie mark, wept her lifeblood. Her crown, her chest piece, her shoes, they were all gone. All of her guards, her ponies, all gone. She was all alone. Her ears swiveled for the smallest sound, and she strained to make her light burn as bright as it could. The effort, however, only made the pounding in her head worse. A large bump on the side of her head throbbed, each pulse sending a wave of pain through her skull. It was making it hard to think. She had a concussion, but still she strained her senses. She listened to the silence. She looked into the dark. She saw and heard nothing, but knew what lay beyond. She could feel the eyes. She was being watched. Her light flickered, her connection with her magic failing. The darkness was drawing in. She was losing sight of the corridor. She was losing sight of herself. Her hooves and tail fell into darkness. Her forelegs and her flanks, her chest, her neck. The light kept fading until she could only see her nose and her horn, and then they too faded into the darkness. Her magic cut out. All the while, the silence continued to press in. She should have heard the echoes of her desperate breathing and shifting hooves. The corridors had been full of echoes when she and the squad had first entered the tunnels. She should have heard the echoes, but the silence was eating every sound she produced. The silence ate the sound just as the darkness seemed to eat her light. The darkness and silence were surrounding her. Then she heard it, a single click in the distance. She focused her eyes on it, but there was no sound after that. Her tension grew. The fairest taste in her mouth grew more intense. The smell of dust and stale air began to carry undercurrents of blood. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears. She knew what lay beyond. She knew what was hunting her. It was lying in wait. It was preparing to pounce. Yet it did not attack. It was just waiting. It was just watching her squirm.
Come on!
She shouted through a tremor in her voice.
What are you waiting for?
Earlier. The aroma from the warm tea wafted up to Celestia's nose, tickling her senses. She lifted the cup slowly, placed it to her lips, and let the finely brewed liquid roll over her tongue. The tea was followed soon after by the soft, warm from the oven scone that Celestia took a small bite from. It was light, fluffy, and it brought a smile to her face. She was sitting in the garden, birds trilling in the trees around her as she sat beneath the shade of a large oak. It was tea time, a short but much appreciated break in her daily labors of ruling the kingdom. It was a time to just listen to the wind in the trees, to feel the light from the sun on her coat, and to perhaps sneak a second scone with her tea. It was also when she would greet Luna. Her sister's sleep schedule had fallen into a predictable rhythm since her return. She slept through the morning and tended to awake in the middle of the afternoon. Celestia would have her afternoon tea as Luna had what could be called her breakfast. This gave them some time to discuss important matters as well as to talk casually. It was a time for them to be sisters. Yet, Luna was late, leaving the seat across from Celestia at the garden table empty. Celestia, however, wasn't worried. Almost once a week Luna would sleep in, often because she had gotten caught up in reading and had not gotten to sleep when she should have. It reminded Celestia of a young Twilight at times. She'd find the filly with a firefly lantern under the covers of her bed, reading a book well past her bedtime. Still, in thinking of Twilight, Celestia knew that Luna had to be woken up. Twilight was coming to the castle at Luna's request, and the Moon Princess needed to be awake to greet her. Thus, after standing up from her seat, Celestia drained her cup of tea, finished her scone, and then began to walk off towards the castle to wake Luna herself. After all, there was mischievous fun to be had in waking Luna in a somewhat unorthodox way. The creak of the door sounded like an alarm bell, and Celestia winced at its sound. She held her breath and listened for the telltale sounds that Luna had awoken. Still, there was no shuffling of hooves or squeaking of the bed. Luna was still asleep, so Celestia pushed the door open a little more, peeking inside. Luna's room was as it always had been, a vision of her night sky captured in fabric, paint, and wood. It was always night in Luna's room. A mural of stars dotted the ceiling. The furniture was Nepalese mahogany, stained to a dark chocolate color. Anything made of fabric was dyed a tone of blue or pale white. Luna herself almost disappeared into the color palette of the room, but a shift of the bed covers made a smile blossom on Celestia's face. It was the smile of a mare who was about to give her sister a proper wake-up scare. Nudging the door open a little more, Celestia raised a forehoof and extended it slowly into the room. She set it down slowly, sucking in a breath as if the air in her lungs would make her just a little lighter. She put her weight down on the hoof and listened for a creak of the boards. The floor, however, remained silent, and Celestia repeated the process as she moved step by step towards Luna. The room was oddly bright. For once, the curtains that usually blocked the windows had been drawn open. Celestia could only guess they had been opened by the castle staff, an attempt to use the bright, warm, greeting sun as a means of drawing Luna from her bed. It obviously hadn't worked. Luna was sleeping with her head beneath the covers. In the end, it made Celestia's approach that much easier. She licked her lips, tasting some trailing crumbs of her scone as she drew closer and closer to the bed. A single floorboard creaked and she froze. Luna shifted under her covers, but did not come out. Celestia would have breathed a sigh of relief, but she feared even that sound might betray her presence. Finally, she was there, just beside the bed. She began to suck in a breath and spread her wings. She would be a Royal Canterlot voice alarm clock, one that was about to blare, "Good afternoon, sister," a shout that would undoubtedly scare Luna awake. Then she would run, Luna would chase, and sometime later that week, Luna would get her back with an equally playful prank. It was the nature of the game they played that often put the castle staff in the crossfire. A final small breath, and Celestia had filled her lungs with all the air they could hold. Chest and cheeks puffed from the pressure, she leaned forward to unleash her voice at full volume. Her smile was wide, and she paused just a moment to picture Luna's face.
"Get away!"
Celestia stumbled back, head spinning and the air escaping from her lungs as she tipped over and toppled to her side. She hit the ground hard, her crown clattering across the floor. Her legs sprawled upward and a few old, loose feathers in her wings went flying into the air. She had just been floored by a single, firm punch from Luna.
"Sister!"
Luna gasped when she realized what she had done. She quickly scrambled out of bed and moved to Celestia's side.
I'm sorry.
Celestia just groaned, her vision swimming as her mind caught up with what had happened. Finally, after a few firm blinks, she managed to clear her sight and slowly climb back to her hooves. She fluttered her wings, settling them back into place at her side, and then lifted a forehoof to her cheek, which was now sore from the blow.
Ow!
Was all she could say as she touched the tender skin.
I'm sorry, Celestia. I didn't know it was you.
Luna apologized. The Moon Princess picked up Celestia's crown and offered it to her. Celestia took it, but at the same time, she noticed the heavy bags beneath Luna's eyes.
Then who were you trying to hit?
Celestia asked as she put her crown back on.
And why do you look like you didn't sleep well? Because I didn't,
Luna admitted as she rubbed her eyes.
I was up half the morning.
Celestia cocked an eyebrow and then glanced over at Luna's bed. There she saw a book on the nightstand. She picked it up and smiled a little as she noticed the title and the description. It looked to be a horror story, one about a bunch of campers getting picked off by a killer in the forest.
Perhaps you should stay away from the scary stories before bed then? Can't have a princess of the night that is scared of the dark after all.
Luna pursed her lips and snatched the book away from Celestia.
I'm not scared of the dark, Celestia. And furthermore, what are you doing in my chambers? I came to wake you,
Celestia answered with a small chuckle, though she was still rubbing her cheek.
You've slept in, and Twilight will be arriving shortly. I just thought, since you were the one to invite her here, that you would want to be there to greet her.
Luna tensed and snapped her head to one side, checking a clock on the wall. She then cursed under her breath, threw the book onto the table, and rushed to her bathroom. At the same time, Celestia moved to the hallway outside Luna's room. There she waited until her sister came out. Luna was clean, dressed in her royal attire, and had managed to make it look like she hadn't just climbed out of bed.
I believe that's a new record,
Celestia teased, a comment that drew a small chuckle from Luna as the two princesses began to walk towards the Canterlot front gates.
Yes, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hit you. I know you didn't,
Celestia assured.
Though, I must say, you have a wonderful right hook.
She rattled her jaw a moment, still feeling the soreness in her cheek.
So, may I ask why you've invited Twilight to the castle? It's kind of a secret,
Luna answered, glancing away from Celestia.
Oh, a secret?
Celestia leaned in a little, gently bumping up against Luna.
What kind of secret? A secret kind of secret,
Luna replied.
And don't try asking her about it either. She's sworn a Pinkie Pie promise to keep the secret from you.
Celestia smiled, a bit of happy anticipation entering her mind. Her birthday was coming up. Yes, perhaps it was a little self-centered of her to think that was what the secret was about, but she couldn't help but smile and wonder. She had employed Pinkie Pie to throw Luna a surprise birthday party earlier that year. Perhaps Luna was now simply trying to return the favor with Twilight's help. After all, few ponies knew her as well as her faithful student.
Very well, I won't pry,
Celestia said as she and Luna reached an intersection in the castle corridors. Celestia stopped and turned to the right, intending to go down the perpendicular hallway while Luna continued going straight.
I need to get back to work anyway. Will I see you all for dinner?
Luna looked over her shoulder and shook her head.
Sorry, sister, but Twilight and I are going to be discussing things in my study all afternoon. But I promise, I'll see you tomorrow for tea. I'll hold you to that, Luna,
Celestia called back with a small chuckle. She then strode off, a small skip in her step at the thoughts of being thrown a surprise party. She hadn't had a surprise party in 113 years. She was well past due. Celestia sat at the garden table, a cup of tea filled but untouched. Biscuits that had been on a small tray lay scattered across the ground, and birds were already flying in to peck at the crumbs. Before Celestia, a guard was bent in a respectful bow. The words he had spoken still rang in Celestia's ears. Her mouth had gone dry, and her body numb. She spread her wings just to keep her balance as the blood rushed from her head. The news she had been given was horrible. Luna and Twilight had gone missing. Princess Celestia banked, feeling the cool night air brushing past her cheek and flowing through her mane. Her feathers held her aloft, and, with another firm beat of her wings, she continued to circle the stone structure that rose up from the forest below her, the place that had once been her home. The ancient castle of the Royal Pony Sisters. Once, it had been the jewel of Equestria. It had been built after Discord's defeat to retake the Everfree Forest. In the 1,000 years since Luna's attempted coup, however, it was the forest that had conquered. Battlements that had once stood strong had been disassembled by the slow, relentless march of vines and trees. Rain, wind, and snow had caused sturdy towers to collapse in on themselves. It was like a skeleton, picked clean by the passage of time. Yet, life glimmered between the towers. Torches, spells, and gemstone headlamps cast their light on the ruins. Like ants over a carcass, the Royal Guard of Canterlot was crawling over the ruins. Pegasi patrolled the skies, and ground-bound guards walked old paths and forged new ones through the thick underbrush. Debris was cleared and rooms were searched. It was a single, organized effort to search every corner of the castle that could be found. A whistle reached Celestia's ears, and she glanced over her shoulder. A pair of Pegasi came up beside her wingtips. They formed up on her, and, after a brief salute, one pointed down to the castle's old gardens. There, Shining Armor was waving up at the princess from a table cluttered with reports, maps, and half-drained thermoses of coffee. It had already been a long night, and the witching hour had only begun. Celestia pitched down, feeling the wind rushing by her with greater speed as she descended with the 2 Pegasi guards following in her wake. She landed with a flutter of her wings, kicking up old leaves and causing the nearby bushes to rustle, as if her presence was an annoyance to them.
"What is the situation, Captain?"
Celestia asked as she approached Shining Armor.
"Not much different than it was an hour ago."
Celestia nodded and turned to look at a nearby structure. She could remember fond times in the garden. It had once been a delight to the eye, and filled with the smell of flowers. Now, most of the garden had gone wild, or died. Trees that had once been kept well trimmed now tore up the ground with their ever-spreading roots. The sweet fragrances of well-tended garden flowers had been replaced by the stench of stagnant water, moss, and old, crumbling stone. Celestia could even see the pedestal that had once held Discord's statue. It now played home to a long-abandoned bird's nest. And, in a back corner of the gardens, was an old building with large doors. Creeping vines covered it. In truth, it was so overgrown that it could have been mistaken for a large bush or fat, low-standing tree. The doors, however, had been cleared, and not by the soldiers who now canvassed the old castle. They had been cleared by those that had gone missing. They had been cleared by those that came before.
"So I take it we're going ahead with the operation, Captain Armor?"
"Yes. But Princess, I should be going with you. Twilight's my sister and..."
"And she is my student, Shining. In truth, neither of us should be going. We are both too close to this. But I am required for this operation to succeed. You are not. That, and should the worst come to worse, you're the one I trust the most to come save us."
"I understand, Princess."
Shining Armor admitted.
"And yes, the soldiers are right over there, and they are ready."
He motioned to a dozen soldiers who were weighed down with packs and other essential supplies. Half were from the Lunar Guard, half were from the Solar Guard.
Then let's not waste any time,
Celestia said. She turned and began to stride towards the soldiers with Shining armor a few steps behind. Shining barked,
"Attention!"
and stood in front of the soldiers as they formed a line. He then glanced once more at Celestia. She gave him a reassuring nod, and, with a sigh, he began to speak with the troops.
"Mares and stallions, in case you haven't already heard, here is our situation. Yesterday afternoon, Twilight Sparkle arrived at Candlelight Castle. She was there by request of Princess Luna, and was greeted by her at the castle gates. The pair then retired to Luna's private study, where they remained until nightfall. After that, they departed Canterlot with a small contingent of lunar guards. Their destination, as reported to the guards stationed at the gates at the time of their departure, is where we're standing. They were coming here, to this ancient castle, and they have neither been seen nor heard from in 24 hours.
Shining armor paused on those words, looking across the soldiers. Their eyes were a mixture of shock and disbelief, but they remained focused. They continued to listen, hanging on every word that came from Shining Armor's mouth.
We have scoured the castle grounds already for any signs of what happened to them. The only evidence we found is the chariot they arrived in. It was left abandoned just outside the main gate. Hoofprints on the ground lead us to believe they entered this structure behind you, which provides access to the castle's underground chambers and tunnel network. Your mission is simple. You must locate and rescue Princess Luna and Twilight Sparkle. This is a worst possible scenario and should be treated as such. They could be caught in a cave-in or otherwise injured. You need to act swiftly and precisely. Is this understood?
Yes, sir, Captain Armor, sir!
The dozen guards barked back.
Good.
Shining said with a nod.
You've all been hoof-picked for this mission by myself. You all bring important talents that will aid in the search and rescue effort. You are also among the most skilled guards we have available. When it comes to combat, either armed or hoof-to-hoof, you are among the best of the best. And there is a reason for this.
Shining armor stressed as he stepped towards the soldiers.
These underground passages were not meant to be visited by the average pony. They provide access to this castle's dungeons, archives, vault, and several other very sensitive rooms. Thus, there is a high chance you'll find doors that are magically sealed and are meant to restrict access to certain areas of the tunnels. Because of this, you need some pony with you that has the authority to enter those restricted areas. Some pony the old spells and enchantments will be able to recognize. There is, however, only one mare that fits that description.
And who is this mare, sir?
One of the soldiers asked. Shining armor lifted a hoof and pointed at Princess Celestia.
Her.
Wait,
One of the guards asked.
we're taking the princess with us? Shouldn't she stay out here? I mean, no offense, but...
I appreciate your concern, Sergeant, but I am going to be accompanying you, and that is an order.
Princess Celestia said firmly. She stepped away from the line of guards and towards the doorway. Her horn glowed, and, with creaks and moans, the aged door began to open. A small wave of old air washed out over them, filling their nostrils with the smell of dust and old water. It was like the castle was breathing out a breath it had held for centuries.
Now, let's get going.
The soldiers glanced to Shining Armor, unsure. He, however, gave them a nod, and that was all they needed to see. They began to follow Princess Celestia. Shining, however, caught the squad's lieutenant, a Pegasus of the Solar Guard, and pulled her to the side.
Lieutenant Twin Blades, I don't think I need to tell you how important it is that Princess Celestia stays safe. With Princess Luna missing, she is the only one that can raise the sun. Check your corners, keep your squads tight, and if things start to get hairy, getting Princess Celestia out is your top priority. Understood?
Yes, Captain.
Good. Now, you have until 30 minutes before dawn. If you haven't come out by then, I'm bringing a platoon down after you. We will find you. Just keep yourselves and Princess Celestia safe.
Lieutenant Twinblades nodded and began to stride towards the door. Though, before she delved into the depths, she turned and looked back over her shoulder.
Don't worry, Captain. We'll keep the princess safe. And we'll find your sister, too. I promise.
Shining Armor let a small smile form on his lips and gave the lieutenant a respectful salute as she descended the steps, disappearing into the darkness. After catching up with everybody else, Lieutenant Twinblades took to leading the team. She walked at the front, flanked on either side by 2 sergeants. Behind them was Celestia, who was encircled by all the corporals that were accompanying them. Behind them, a final guard, the last sergeant, brought up the rear. Those with horns lit the darkness magically. The others were wearing a special variation of the royal armor. The helmets and chest pieces had light gems embedded in their metal, gems that projected a cone of light forward when active. They were following an old map of the castle's tunnels and soon found themselves in a large circular room. It had corridors branching off in all directions. Some signs still hung from the old stonework, marking paths to chambers that had not seen a soul in centuries. Other signs had fallen and rotted away, leaving some paths a mystery. Celestia recognized the room even after 1,000 years, and the nostalgia swept over her as she came to a stop.
This is the Rotunda. I remember the servants used to hold parties down here when it was Samponi's birthday. It's just below the throne room.
Yes. And it's also a central access point to most of the castle's underground chambers.
Twinblades commented as she and the other guards moved to the center of the space. She spread her wings, pointing at different spots in the chamber as she gave her orders with a firm, authoritative tone.
This will be our base of operations. We're going to search every corner of these tunnels, making regular stops back here to give updates and drop off any pony we should find. I want this place set up, and I want search squads formed 10 minutes ago.
The other guards saluted and quickly began their tasks. Lanterns were set up, illuminating the dark chamber, and other supplies were drawn out of the bags. At the same time, Twinblades and Princess Celestia strode towards the archway which led back the way they came.
May I speak freely, Princess?
Twinblades asked. She stopped, shrugged off her bags, and began to dig in them.
Of course, Lieutenant.
I don't like you being down here. It's a risk, especially if some pony is taking your sister intentionally. If those pony nappers are still down here, we may be giving you them on a silver platter. But at the same time, there is no denying the fact that we need you down here. We won't be able to check half these chambers without some pony that can undo the locks. Because of this, I want to lay down some rules. Your safety is a priority down here. If things go south and I tell you to run, you run. No argument, no pulling rank, you run. Do you understand?
I don't think it will come to that, Lieutenant,
Princess Celestia commented.
It may not, but I still need your word,
Twinblades said. She withdrew glinting metal from her saddlebags and secured them to her wings. They were short blades that shined from a fresh polish and sharpening. They were blades issued to all the Pegasi of the Guard, though it was a rare occasion where they were needed.
Now, do you swear?
Celestia was silent for a few seconds before she nodded.
I will promise to respect your expertise in this situation, Lieutenant.
Twinblades flapped into the air, and with a few sparks, struck out at the stone above the archway they had come in through. She used her blades to leave scratches upon the stone, making a downward-pointing arrow.
Good. Now, I need one more thing from you, Princess. Do you know why your sister brought Twilight here?
No, I don't,
Celestia replied.
There should be hardly anything left here at the old castle. Everything was to be moved to Canterlot when it was finished. I don't know what they could be here for.
Twinblades landed back on the ground, folding her wings but leaving her blades attached.
There goes any hope of focusing our search then. We'll just have to go room by room.
She began to walk back towards the other soldiers of the squad, who had already gotten a fair distance into unpacking what would be their base of operations. She lowered a wing to the ground, dragging the attached blade against the stone. The scraping sound drew the attention of the other guards, who quickly turned and stood at attention.
All right. Once we're done setting up, we're breaking into teams of 2. Princess Celestia and I will be searching the chamber secured behind the doors only the princess can open. Fortress will remain here at the base to keep track of our progress and keep the lanterns lit. Every pony else, pair up and pick an archway. Use magic to stay in contact and send in a message spell each time you clear a room. We're doing this by the books, folks. Track your progress, check your corners, and don't do anything stupid.
Come on! You have to know something.
I don't know.
It's just us. No pony will know. You can tell me.
I don't know.
Pathfinder stepped through the archway into the chamber, light from his horn stretching out to fill the space. He was a member of the Solar Guard, like Twin Blades, and thus was clad in the characteristic golden armor. The armor, however, wasn't up to regulation. Pathfinder had loosened the straps around the barrel of his chest, letting them dangle free.
I'll be your best friend if you tell me.
I don't know.
Nightgaze reiterated. The Earth Pony Lunar Guard had come into the chamber behind Pathfinder, his armor in pristine condition and in perfect order. No strap was loose, and it had been polished to a shine. It was in good enough shape to march a parade, despite being armor that had seen service. Pathfinder blew a short raspberry with his tongue before turning and looking across the room. The smell of rotten wood was heavy in the air, and its source was evident. The pair currently found themselves in an old guard barrack. Wooden bunk beds, which had become nothing more than decomposed piles of wood, dotted the room at regular intervals. Mattresses and bedding had long been removed. In truth, it looked more like a room for storing compost than anything else.
Ugh. Well, that's another thing I can add to my list of things I never want to smell again,
Pathfinder said as he covered his nose with his hoof.
Millennia-old guard barrack smell. Ugh. Its own body odor plus the wonderful bouquet of rotten wood. No. Wait. There's something else.
What?
Nightgaze asked.
It's the smell of...
Pathfinder turned, focusing on Nightgaze as a smile spread onto his lips.
burning pants.
Nightgaze furrowed his eyebrows, and a tone of irritation entered his voice.
I am not lying. I don't know what Princess Luna was doing here.
Oh, come on.
Pathfinder reached over and hooked a foreleg around Nightgaze, their armor clanking up against one another.
I won't say a word to the Lieutenant or Princess Celestia, I swear.
I don't know.
Nightgaze spat, pulling himself away from Pathfinder.
Okay. I'll make it easier for you. I'll guess, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Were they out here for a camping trip?
I don't know.
Stargazing?
I don't know.
Sexy slumber party?
Nightgaze gritted his teeth and stomped a hoof.
Sergeant Pathfinder, I do not know. None of the Lunar Guard even knew the princess was leaving until she left.
Nightgaze threw a forehoof into the air, aggravation in his voice.
Do you and Lieutenant Twinblades know why Princess Celestia does everything she does? No? Then do not expect the same of the Lunar Guard.
Okay. No need to get snippy,
Pathfinder said as he trotted further into the room, beginning to properly search the space.
If you don't want to tell me, just say no.
Nightgaze shivered in rage, but sucked in a deep breath and calmed himself before he did something he would regret. He admitted defeat and began checking around the piles of rotten wood while Pathfinder looked into the corners of the room. Still, the silence between the two of them was not meant to last.
So, the Batwings the Lunar Guard Pegasi have, are they real?
Pathfinder asked as he casually lifted up a piece of wood from one of the piles. Nightgaze groaned out through his nose and continued to search, refusing to look over in Pathfinder's direction.
Do you really think this is the time?
I don't usually see night guards,
Pathfinder answered. He dropped the piece of wood back on its pile and began to trot towards Nightgaze.
I'm on a shift in the middle of the day. Sweet gig, too. When I'm not searching for lost ponies, I'm standing guard over the royal kitchen, and they have the best scraps! I haven't had to buy myself lunch in months. Still, because of my shift, I never get to see any lunar guards, so when else will I have this opportunity?
Nightgaze rubbed the bridge of his nose.
Well, Pathfinder, let me answer your question with another question. Do you normally have a gray coat and gold eyes, like all the other unicorns in the Solar Guard?
Nah, I'm way better looking than this.
Pathfinder flashed a smile and lifted a foreleg so he could flex. Nightgaze rolled his eyes and tapped his armor.
Well, the Lunar Guard has enchantments on our armor, just like the Solar Guard. So no, our Pegasi don't really have bat wings.
Nightgaze glanced around the room one final time. He then began to move towards the door.
Now come on. Check in with Fortress and let's get to the next room.
Pathfinder chuckled and started to follow Nightgaze out of the room.
You and the lieutenant should hang out once we're done with this. You two would get along like a mare in a fine dress.
Just send the report.
Pathfinder chuckled again before focusing on his horn. It glowed, building up a bubble of smoky white magic.
Room clear. Moving on to next. End message,
he said, causing the bubble to turn a blue tone. It then detached from his horn and zoomed off into the dark corridors, finding its way back to Fortress in the Rotunda. Celestia stepped back, a few traces of magic trailing from her horn to the door before them. Ancient spells within creaked and moaned, turning ancient tumblers. Finally, a resounding clank announced the opening of the locks, and the door popped inward. Dust curled off the floor, and Celestia reignited her light spell as she and Twinblade stepped into the long, sealed chamber. The princess rubbed her nose, the dust clogging her sinuses. She couldn't smell anything but the dust, and had to fight the urge to sneeze a second time. Still, she looked about the space, noting the shelves still lined with books and the furniture that, unlike other rooms, had resisted the passage of time.
Are you going to be okay?
Twinblades asked as she went to one of the shelves and began looking across the spines of the books.
Yes, I'm fine, Lieutenant.
Celestia replied before snorting, clearing out a final bit of dirt from her nose.
Where are we now?
If the maps can be trusted, this is the private chambers of the court soothsayer.
Celestia nodded, striding towards the back of the room where a bed and a desk lay under heavy layers of accursed dust.
I had forgotten the court used to have a soothsayer. Luna was always the one more interested in the less practiced and understood aspects of magic. She was the one that wanted us to keep such a unicorn on staff. I believe the last soothsayer was Oracle Bell. Yes, that was her name. She was the last one, actually. After Luna's, failed coup. I never saw the need to find a new one.
Celestia looked over the bed and then turned on the spot.
Still, it doesn't look like anyone's been in here. Let's move on to...
She tossed her head and fluttered her wings with her sneeze, causing the dust around her to swirl up into the air. The sneeze turned to coughing, and Celestia waved her hoof in front of her mouth as she struggled to get a clean breath of air. Now she couldn't smell or taste anything but the horrid particles of dirt that seemed intent on assaulting her.
This dust is unbearable,
Celestia choked out.
Perhaps you'd like to replace Fortress in the Rotunda, Your Highness. You can act as our dispatcher until we've cleared all the easily accessible spaces. Then the squad as a whole can check these more secure rooms.
I am fine, Lieutenant,
Celestia reiterated with a flap of her wings. That flap blew dust off the nearby work desk and bed, as well as causing something to flutter into the air. The movement caught the attention of Twinblades, and she quickly moved to stand beside the desk.
What are these?
She asked, picking up a square shape with her wing. It had been hidden beneath the dust on the desk. It was colorful, rigid, rectangular, and featured the image of a dragon framed by 7 swords.
They're tarot cards,
Celestia answered as she came up behind Twin Blades.
It's a dragon set Luna was given by an ambassador. She used to love this deck. She'd always beat me when we played cards with them. Just something about them made her lucky.
You use tarot cards to play a game? I thought they were just for fortune-telling.
Originally, tarot cards were just playing cards, Lieutenant,
Celestia commented as she leaned in to get a better look at the card Twin Blades was holding.
If I remember correctly, Oracle Bell was one of the first to use a tarot card deck to tell the future. They practically became the core of her soothsaying after a while. I had to sit through many meals where Luna listened to her ramble on about how the cards were the truest path to seeing the future. She'd even use other methods of prediction just to figure out how to lay out her cards.
Sounds interesting,
Twin Blades commented as she used her wing's feathers to turn over the cards she had picked up.
Like I said, Luna has always had the keener interest in the more uncommon forms of magic. I didn't think of it too much myself until one of Oracle Bell's predictions came true in the worst way.
Celestia stepped away from the desk, her mind rifling back through her memories.
I still remember what she said. A joining path pattern. 2 predictions culminating into a single future. There was a path for me. It was comprised of the Sun, the inverted Queen of Coins, the Queen of Wards, the 5 of Coins, and the inverted Hanging Dragon. Then there was a path for Luna. It had the inverted Moon, the inverted Judgment, the 8 of Swords, the inverted Hermit, and the inverted Strength. Those 2 paths came together into a single prediction. The 3 of Swords, the inverted Lover, the 5 of Swords, the 7 of Swords, and finally, the Inverted Chariot.
What does that all mean?
I've never studied card reading,
Celestia answered as she turned back to face Twin Blades.
All I can say is what Oracle Bell told me and Luna 1,000 years ago. The Sun is a mare who focuses too much on the work side of her life. She is a mare of leadership who will face an unforeseen expense. She will not see it coming, for like the inverted hanging dragon, she sees the world as if it were upside down. The moon,
Celestia continued, reciting the words in the same tone they were originally spoken in.
She suffers imbalance and can see no way out of the dark. She isolates herself, alienates herself. She is too emotional to think clearly. These 2 shall meet, and in that meeting, face heartbreak. There will be a betrayal, a crossing of swords, and a parting of ways. One will make an important, needed sacrifice, but the cycle will still remain incomplete.
Celestia sighed, letting her voice return to normal.
It is only later, after this prediction had come to pass, that I would realize Oracle Bell spoke of my sister's betrayal, her transformation into Nightmare Moon, and our clash.
Celestia said softly, the memories hurting like an old wound. Twin Blades looked back at the cards she held in the prehensile feathers of her wing.
And you said one of the cards was the 7 of Swords, right?
Celestia nodded.
Yes, I did. Why do you ask?
Twin Blades extended her wing and placed the card back down on the table. She then gently ran her feathers across the surface, wiping away the dust that still lingered there to reveal more cards. Their colorful images bore labels. Some were inverted, facing the opposite direction of the others, but the pattern was clearly visible. 2 paths of 5 cards, each feeding into another column of 5 cards, one of which was the 7 of Swords the lieutenant had been holding.
This pattern is still laid out?
Celestia whispered, her eyes reflecting her disbelief.
I mean, Oracle Bell left the royal court before Luna's coup, and there were no other soothsayers after her. I suppose it's possible that no one cleaned out this room, but why would Oracle Bell leave the cards laid out if she was leaving?
Celestia lifted a hoof and tapped the nearest card.
Still, it's a bit poetic. The Inverted Chariot? An incomplete cycle? I didn't defeat my sister forever the day I used the elements of harmony against her. I only delayed her, only paused the cycle until it could be completed by my student and her friends.
What about those two cards?
Celestia cocked her head and looked to Twin Blades.
What do you mean?
The lieutenant extended a wing and tapped a pair of cards that were set between the two initial branches.
There's two cards here you didn't mention. This top one's called the Hierophant?
She looked over her shoulder at Celestia.
What the hey is a Hierophant?
It's an old term for a priest, another kind of soothsayer,
Celestia commented. She called on her magic and picked up the two cards so she could look at them more closely.
I don't know what it means, though. You'd need to ask someone who knows how to read tarot cards.
Well, what's this second card?
Celestia shifted the Hierophant behind the second card and then felt an odd chill run up her spine as she looked at the ghastly image that had been revealed. The card depicted a red dragon in a fire-burned forest. He was a dark, deathly red and held a black trident. The label at the bottom of the card read, "The Devil."
Oh my,
Celestia said before turning the card so Twin Blades could see.
Isn't this pleasant?
I'd say creepy, Your Highness.
The lieutenant turned her back on the desk and began to trot towards the door.
And in any case, we spent too long in here. Please send a report spell to Fortress and then let's move to the next room. Every second we waste could make all the difference.
Celestia nodded and set the two cards back where they were on the desk. She summoned the report spell, spoke to it, and then let it zip away before quickly falling in line behind Twin Blades. They did not bother to close the door to the soothsayer's old quarters, leaving it open to succumb to the natural darkness as they walked further away with their sources of light.
We've cleared the old soothsayer's quarters and are moving on to the next chamber. End message.
The bubble of the communication spell popped after that, its words echoing off the stone walls of the Rotunda. Fortress, a sturdy-built unicorn mare of the Lunar Guard, had taken off her armor and was doing push-ups near the center of the room. Her natural coat color, a fine bronze, was revealed along with her bright red hair and her cutie mark, a closed castle gate. Beads of sweat were running down her brow, but she continued with a relentless rhythm of push-ups all the same. The Rotunda served as a modest base of operations for the squad's search. Lanterns had been placed on the floor in front of each archway that connected to the circular room, providing beacons into the dark hallways. There were also a couple lanterns on the small command post that had been assembled in the room's center. They illuminated a few packs filled with supplies and a large map of the castle's old tunnel network that had been copied from a book in Canterlot. As Fortress continued her push-ups, bulky muscles flexing, she lit her horn and picked up a quill. She dipped it once into an inkwell, then used it to mark an X on the room Celestia and Twin Blades had just visited. She then set the quill down and formed a messenger spell of her own. She did this all without missing a beat, continuing her push-ups as she mentally counted off her reps. The bubble slipped off her horn and bobbed up and down, keeping itself in line with her head.
Roger. Continue on to your next room. All teams are up to date on their reports. Still no sign of Princess Luna or Twilight Sparkle. We've searched roughly a quarter of the chambers. We'll await your next report. End message.
The bubble in front of her turned a blue tone and flew off in the direction of one of the archways. Fortress then finished her push-ups and, after stretching a bit, laid out on her back and began to do crunches. Another message bubble came rolling into the room and floated near her as it spoke.
Hey, Fortress, this is Pathfinder. Nightgaze wanted me to pass a message along. He says he'd like to oil up that bodybuilder physique of yours sometime, and let you work him over. Sounds kinky.
I said no such thing.
Nightgaze's voice protested, coming from the same bubble.
Fortress, I beg you, let me come in and watch the Rotunda. I can't stand his prattling.
Aww, if you want some time with Fortress, I could just watch the Rotunda. How about it, Fortress? Want to find a nice dark corner with Nightgaze? End message.
Fortress laughed as she lowered herself back down to the ground. Pathfinder's message spell popped, but it was soon replaced by a new one from Fortress. She spoke into it, trying to suppress her snickering.
Sorry boys, Lieutenant's orders. I got to hold down the fort. Try not to kill each other. End message.
She watched the bubbles zip off before chuckling and going back to her crunches.
That, and I'd have probably broken Pathfinder's nose by now if I was on Pedro with him. Better you than me, Nightgaze.
Fortress froze, ears forward and body tense. She was back on her hooves in a moment, looking for the source of the sound. She turned slowly, eyes darting about as she calmed her breathing and wiped the sweat from her brow. She began to inch herself towards her armor, wishing to quickly put her helmet back on if something chose to attack. It was then, however, she saw the source of the sound, and it caused her to breathe out with a huff. A lantern had fallen over and was rolling around on its side. Its glass clinked and jingled against the stone as it rolled until it eventually came to a stop. Fortress quickly relaxed her guard and trotted over to the lantern, picking it up in her magic. She checked it over quickly for damage, huffing out a small breath of air through her nose.
Must have been sitting on level,
she commented before carrying the lantern back to the archway it had been illuminating. Each lantern around the Rotunda's perimeter was to be something of a light at the end of the tunnel. Everything in the network of corridors eventually led back to the Rotunda. It was the way this place was designed. Thus, in case of emergency, all any pony had to do was run until they saw a light. Then they could follow it back to the Rotunda, where every pony agreed to regroup if something happened. Fortress set the lantern back in place, gave it a gentle tap to make sure it wouldn't fall over, then turned her back on it. She didn't really see the point of all the lanterns. It was not like they were going to be ambushed. Shining armor was guarding the castle outside. They, and supposedly the mares they were searching for, were the only ones down in the catacombs. There was supposed to be no pony else. Fortress turned and glared. She hadn't gotten more than 4 steps away when the lantern had fallen over again. Now it was lying on its side, as if daring her to set it upright again.
Don't make me glue you to the floor,
she threatened as she set it upright again. She then watched it for a few seconds to be sure it would stay balanced before she got back down on the floor to resume her crunches.
Now, where was...
Once more, the lantern fell and rolled along its side. And, once more, Fortress looked at it, but this time it was not with disdain or anger. It was with caution. She flicked her gaze up to the archway the lantern was supposed to be illuminating. She focused her gaze into the darkness beyond, and felt as if the darkness was staring back. Getting up, she cast a light spell from her horn and bent it into a cone. She focused it down the corridor beyond the archway, flashing the light against the walls. There was nothing there, and the sensation of being watched had left as well. It was just an empty corridor. Fortress tapped her hoof in annoyance and then looked back down at the lantern. She grabbed it up with her mouth and began to walk to the archway. At the same time, she cast a spell on the archway's keystone. She morphed and transfigured it, eventually creating a small hook. She levitated the lamp to that hook and hung it there.
For love of that,
she said, pointing a hoof at the lamp. She then smiled, and believing herself triumphant against the unbalanced lamp, went back to the center of the room and her crunches. And, this time, the lantern did stay put. It hung from the keystone, illuminating the top of the arch as a light above the doorway. It did, however, sway a little, as if it had been gently tapped once to test how securely it was hung.